She called her sister on a Tuesday afternoon. "If something happens to me, look into the people I met here." Her sister thought she was overthinking. 3 days later, Marissa Hale was gone. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. Her boots were by the door. Her car was parked outside. Wallet, keys, medication, all untouched. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed. It looked like she'd simply stopped existing inside her own home. Police found her last incoming call came from a burner phone, 32 seconds. No voicemail, purchased with cash that same day, used once, then never again. And when investigators started asking questions about the gatherings she'd attended outside town, they discovered something unsettling. Marissa wasn't the first woman to vanish from communities like this, and she wouldn't be the last. I am Raf Quinn. In 2021, I was asked to review a missing person case from Bend, Oregon. A woman named Marissa Hale had disappeared from her apartment in 2018. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just gone. Police initially believed she'd left voluntarily, new town, new life. Maybe she'd changed her mind. But that theory collapsed within days. No bank activity, no phone use, no transportation records. And when I examined the case file, I found something investigators had noted, but never fully pursued. Marissa had told multiple people she felt uncomfortable around someone she'd met at gatherings outside town. But she'd never filed a report, never named anyone. And 2 days before she disappeared, she'd made that call to her sister. A warning she never got to explain. But there was one small detail inside Marissa's apartment investigators couldn't explain, and that detail troubled them more than anything else. Marissa Hale was 32 when she vanished in September of 2018. Former graphic designer, Portland. She'd left corporate life earlier that year, searching for something more meaningful. Friends said she'd felt burned out, disconnected, wanted a simpler life closer to nature, closer to herself. She moved to Bend in June, found work at a small wellness cafe, started attending meditation groups, joined outdoor gatherings, hiking groups, music circles around fires in the forest. She seemed happier, like someone rebuilding. Marissa had a 7-year-old son. He stayed with his father in Portland while she stabilized her new life. The plan was to bring him to Bend once she'd settled, found a bigger place, saved money. She called him every night, FaceTimed before bed, sent postcards. Her ex-partner said Marissa was consistent, reliable. She wouldn't just disappear on their son. That wasn't who she was. In early September, Marissa attended a gathering outside towns. Small group, fire drums, music drifting through the trees. These gatherings happened regularly in the forests surrounding Bend. Informal, word of mouth. People would show up, stay a few hours, then leave. Some were locals, others were passing through. Transient spiritual communities drawn to the area for retreats, hiking, wellness culture. It was that kind of town. But something happened that night. Marissa's neighbor said she came home looking shaken, disoriented, like she hadn't slept. The neighbor asked if she was okay. Marissa said she was fine, just tired. But later that week, Marissa mentioned to a coworker that someone at the gathering had crossed a line, made her uncomfortable. The coworker asked if she'd reported it. Marissa said no, said she didn't want to make it a big thing, said she'd just avoid that person going forward. On the 18th of September, Marissa called her sister. Normal conversation at first, catching up, talking about her son, about work. Then Marissa said something strange. "If something happens to me, look into the people I met here." Her sister asked what she meant. Marissa said she just had a bad feeling, that some of the people in Bend weren't who they seemed. Her sister told her to trust her instincts, maybe come back to Portland for a visit, clear her head. Marissa said maybe. They hung up. That was the last time they spoke. 3 days later, on the 21st of September, Marissa didn't show up for her shift at the cafe her manager called. No answer, Tried again. Nothing. By afternoon, the manager contacted Marissa's landlord, asked him to check the apartment. Landlord knocked. No response. Used his key. Went inside. The apartment was quiet. Clean. Marissa's phone was on the kitchen counter, plugged in, charging. Her hiking boots were by the door, jacket hanging on a hook. Her car was parked in its spot outside. Keys on the counter next to her phone. Wallet there too. Cash and cards inside. Her medication in the bathroom cabinet. Everything in place. Except Marissa Paulus were called. They searched the apartment. No signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No damaged windows. No signs of struggle. Bed was made. Dishes washed and put away. Everything looked normal. Like she'd stepped out for a moment and never came back. But her phone and keys suggested she hadn't left voluntarily. You don't leave without those things unless something's wrong. Detectives questioned neighbors. One said they'd heard Marissa's door close around 10 p.m. on the 20th of September. Thought maybe she was going for a walk. Didn't see her leave. Didn't hear anything unusual after that. Another neighbor said they'd seen an unfamiliar car parked on the street that evening. Couldn't describe it clearly. Just noticed it because it wasn't normally there. Didn't get a plate number. Didn't see who was driving. Paulus pulled Marissa's phone records. Her last outgoing call was to her son at 7:34 p.m. on the 20th of September. First time, 12 minutes. Her ex-partner confirmed, said Marissa. Seemed normal. Happy. Told their son a bedtime story. Said goodnight. No indication anything was wrong. But there was one more call incoming. At 9:47 p.m., from a number that wasn't saved in her contacts. The call lasted 32 seconds. No voicemail left. Detectives traced the number. Burner phone, purchased with cash at a convenience store in Redmond, 30 miles from Bend. Activated that same day, used once, to call Marissa. Then never used again. No way to identify who owned it. Investigators checked Marissa's bank accounts. Last transaction was the 19th of September. Coffee shop, $4. Nothing after that. No ATM withdrawals. No credit card use. They checked transportation records. Buses, trains, flights. Nothing. No evidence she'd left Bend. Volunteers organized search parties, combed nearby forests, trails the Deschutes River. Areas Marissa was known to hike. Nothing. No clothing, no belongings. No trace. Detectives interviewed Marissa's co-workers, asked about the gathering where she'd felt uncomfortable. Who was there? What happened? One co-worker said Marissa had mentioned a man who'd been overly persistent, treeing to talk to her, asking personal questions, following her around the fire. She'd left early because of it, but she hadn't mentioned his name, just said he made her uneasy. The coworker asked if anyone else at the cafe knew him. A few people said they'd seen someone matching the description at other gatherings, but nobody knew his real name. He went by a nickname, something vague, and he wasn't from Bend. Just passed through occasionally. Paulus started asking around the local community, meditation groups, wellness centers, outdoor gatherings. Several women came forward with similar stories. Men at gatherings who'd crossed lines, unwanted advances, drinks that tasted off, feeling disoriented after, but none of them had filed formal reports. Zone woman said she'd felt too embarrassed. Another said she didn't think police would take it seriously. It was just a bad interaction. She'd left, moved on. But when investigators started connecting the stories, a pattern emerged. Same types of gatherings, same transient nature, same lack of accountability. Then detectives noticed something disturbing. Marissa wasn't the only woman who had disappeared from communities like this. Over the previous 5 years, there had been at least 4 other cases. Oregon, Northern California, Washington. Woman in their late 20s to mid-30s. new to town, involved in transient spiritual or wellness communities. All had vanished without clear explanation. Some cases were still open. Others had been closed due to lack of evidence. In 2 cases, women were believed to have left voluntarily, but families insisted that didn't make sense. And in all cases, there were mentions of informal gatherings, people who appeared briefly and then disappeared, and no clear suspect ever identified. One investigator reached out to colleagues in other jurisdictions, compared notes. The similarities were striking. Woman arriving alone in new towns, seeking connection, attending informal gatherings with minimal oversight, and then vanishing. Sometimes their belongings were left behind, sometimes their cars, but always there was a burner phone call shortly before they disappeared. Always a gathering mentioned, always a transient community, and always no one could identify the men who'd made them uncomfortable. I spoke to Marissa's sister years later. She said she'd replayed that last phone call 1,000 times, wished she'd pushed harder, asked more questions, made Marissa promise to come home immediately. She said Marissa had sounded scared, but also like she didn't want to admit it, like she was trying to convince herself everything was fine. The sister said Marissa had always been independent, strong, not someone who scared easily. So when she said, "If something happens to me," it meant something. It meant she knew. Detectives also spoke to Marissa's ex-partner. He said Marissa had mentioned feeling watched in the weeks before she disappeared, like someone was paying too much attention to her routines, where she worked, when she hiked, what trails she used. He'd told her to be careful, maybe vary her schedule. She'd said she would. But she also said she didn't want to live in fear, didn't want to let paranoia ruin the new life she was building. There was another detail in the case file. A week before Marissa disappeared, she'd posted on a local community board, asked if anyone knew someone who went by a certain nickname, said she'd met him at a gathering and wanted to return something he'd left behind. No one responded, but investigators found the post, and they wondered, was she trying to identify him, or was she trying to warn others? The post was deleted 3 days before she vanished from her account. But Marissa's sister said Marissa never mentioned deleting it. And when detectives checked her laptop, there was no record of her logging into that account after posting. Months after Marissa disappeared, police received a tip. Someone said they'd seen a man matching the description given by multiple women at a gathering outside Ashland, 2 hours south of Bend, different community, same informal setup, fires, music, transient people. Detectives drove down, asked around. A few people remembered seeing him, but he'd left weeks earlier. No one knew where he'd gone. No one knew his real name, just the nickname. And when investigators tried to find records, rental agreements, anything that might identify him, they found nothing. He'd been staying with friends, paying cash, no paper trail. I reviewed photos from Marissa's apartment. Everything looked undisturbed. But there was one thing that stood out: her hiking boots. They were by the door, laces tied, like she'd taken them off after coming inside. But her coworker said Marissa always untied her boots before taking them off. It was a habit, something about protecting the laces. The coworker said if Marissa's boots were by the door still tied, it meant she either hadn't worn them that day, or someone else had placed them there. Police had noted it, but couldn't determine what it meant. There was also the 32-second phone call. Detectives tried to understand what could be said in 32 seconds. Not much. Maybe a few sentences. Maybe a question and a short answer. Or maybe just silence. Maybe someone calling to confirm she was home, alone. And then, the timing troubled investigators. The call came at 9:47 p.m. Marissa's neighbor heard her door close around 10 p.m. 13 minutes later. If the call was from whoever took her, that is a small window, but possible. Years passed. Marissa's case went cold. No new leads, no body, no evidence. Her son grew up without answers. Her family held on to hope for a while, then just held on to grief. Paulus reclassified the case. Inactive, insufficient evidence. But the detective who'd worked it longest said he never stopped thinking about it. Said there were too many coincidences, too many similar cases, too many women who'd felt uncomfortable and then vanished. He believed someone was targeting these communities, knew how to blend in, knew how to identify vulnerable people, new arrivals, alone, seeking connection, and he knew how to disappear just as easily as his victims. I don't know what happened to Marissa Hale. The evidence doesn't prove abduction, doesn't prove murder, but it also doesn't support voluntary disappearance. And the pattern across multiple states suggests something deliberate. Someone moving through transient communities. Someone who understands that places built on anonymity and reinvention offer cover. Where people arrive without histories. Where informal gatherings happen without records. Where someone can appear, act, and vanish without leaving a trail. Marissa came to Bend to start over, to build something meaningful. She was excited about bringing her son, about creating a life in the mountains, about finding herself again. And somewhere in that process, she encountered someone who saw opportunity, someone who knew she was new, alone, and that made her a target. Her sister still lives in Portland, still has Marissa's number saved in her phone, still sometimes starts to call before remembering. She said the hardest part isn't the not knowing, it is the knowing that Marissa warned her, said, if something happens to me. And no one took it seriously until it was too late. Marissa Hale has been missing since the 21st of September, 2018. Her case remains open. Technically, but no active investigation, no new leads, just a file, a few photos, and a 32-second phone call from a number that was never used again. But here is what I keep thinking about. That burner phone, purchased the same day it called, Marissa used once, then discarded. That is not impulsive. That is planned. That is someone who knows how to avoid leaving evidence. And if they planned the phone call, they planned everything else too. Which means Marissa didn't vanish because of bad luck. She vanished because someone decided she would. And in communities built on trust and openness, where people arrive seeking connection, that kind of predator can move freely. Because no one wants to believe danger exists in spaces designed for healing. Marissa Hale's son is 14 now, growing up with questions no one can answer. And somewhere, in forests where gatherings still happen, fires burn and music drifts through the trees. New people arrive every week, looking for connection, looking for meaning. And if the pattern investigators suspected is real, somewhere out there is someone who knows exactly where to find them. This is Midnight Ledger, where some disappearances happen, not because someone was in the wrong place, but because they were exactly where a predator was waiting.